okay? We want a little bit darker.
That's better.
Too much. Okay, we're good. All right, so I was on a dig this last summer. It was one thing that came into the mail for me, and I saw an opportunity. It's up in the Rangeley area with a community college called Colorado Northwestern Community College, and I gave it a go. This is an ongoing discovery, so full disclosure, there's only so much I can tell you about because they're still doing a lot of research and figuring things out. This is one of the bones that they did in fact find. I decided to give you guys more or less a kind of a tour of what we call the taphonomy. So this is what we call from death to discovery, and the things that we're learning as we're getting that, and how we actually get into that process. So with a few things that'll show us the find that they're so excited about, and I got to be a wonderful part of. So.
I point to the plan. Closer.
Closer. There we go. All right. So, fun picture. A lot of times, and this was kind of the experience while we were out there in Rangeley. We had a lot of people who had never been on a dig before, and this is kind of what a lot of people think it is. We take a brush, we find the whole animal, and it's pretty easy work. No. Despite what Jurassic Park and everything else says, no, it's not that easy. It's really never that easy. I've spent a lot of times 8 hours on a jackhammer just trying to get at the bones. So it's quite an involved process. All right, so the discovery was dubbed Walter's Bone after the Great Dane of the couple who found it. This is the husband. His name's Josh Ellis. That's part of the femur, I believe, that they had discovered. He and his wife were out walking their dog, and he knows the area pretty well, and they found a wonderful bone that had some other interesting features on it that got them interested in actually contacting their local paleontologist who lives actually in Craig, so quite a ways away. And she listened, didn't really pay too much attention. I'm like, no, you really need to come check this out. So they checked it out and decided to actually start a dig. So there's going to be a lot more of this animal that they're uncovering. Get it? No, don't get it. All right, so here they are. This is Ellis Thompson. She's the wife of Josh, they're the ones that found the bone. And this is Liz Johnson. She was the paleontologist that they contacted. And here they are sitting up on what we're calling the Overburden. All right, this is the cliff face that we looked up to every day as we were digging in the bones. And they're sitting atop of a bunch of the earth that they are going to be in the process of removing. This actually started in May, and I didn't get to join them until the last part of June. All right, so some of the tools and things that they're using, you can see the gamut. We got jackhammers, we got picks, crowbars, shovels, buckets, rock hammers, rubber hammers when you get really close and you don't want to break the bone. Awls, brushes, shovels, oh, it's in there twice. That must be important. Sledgehammers, aluminum foil, toilet paper, plaster, burlap, lots of water, and yeah, dental picks, even out in the field, plenty of tarps, because there is no shade where we were working, a generator to run the jackhammer, and the rock saw, knee pads, because your knees get tired kneeling on the rock all day, plastic bags, that's for bagging up the specimens and taking them, markers for marking the specimens, a field notebook, grid, we use some Jacob staffs, tarps are in there again because they're more important, and lots of other things. The field notebook, which is actually kind of an interesting thing, as they're taking the notes and actually documenting where all this is found, can actually become copyrighted material. And there have been cases where Liz actually worked with some people who are a guy who was doing some private collecting, actually collected on public land, and they had to use the information that she had gathered to put this guy in jail for a few years. So that was actually submitted in court. The field notebook can become a very important piece of information. All right, so the overburden, that's the layer of rock above the bones that we gotta remove before we can actually start to get them out. That can be a chore in and of itself. I think they worked on this for a good 2-3 weeks before they even got down to the bone layer. And here they are. So the place they were sitting in that last picture was right here. The bone layer is actually close to this tree. So yeah, we got a long ways to go. These were 8-hour days, I believe. When it was all said and done for the first season, they put in over 600 man-hours. And we still haven't got the whole animal out yet. In fact, we've got very little of it out at this point. The volunteers also came from University of North Carolina State. They were invited along with one of the grad students who's working on some of the interesting research that goes along with this. There we go. All right, so, back. Okay, so once we get the overburden removed, we can start work on the bones. All right? As we start to find more and more of these bones, we want to set up a grid. And the grid, there's so many different kinds of grids. Most of them are handmade. You have usually PVC pipe about so long, not so wide. We have string strung across each one that divides it up into sections. That way we can piece together, okay, where the animal was actually found in relation to all the other bones that we're finding too, and how they were actually laid down as we're uncovering them and getting them out. So we can figure out more about how the animal died, what events actually led to this animal dying, what the geology was like, and everything else. It gives us a good example, good information of what we've got, and helps us when we're trying to reassemble them after we get them back, because you jacket all this stuff up, and yeah, you've got them marked. But then as you're uncovering this stuff, it's been a while. You've been out in the field, and then you have someone else who's actually working on the lab part of it, actually uncovering it, and they'll need to refer back to the notes that you've taken out in the field so we can start piecing this animal back together. So here's an example of a grid. And the orange line in the back, the top, is representing a reference point. So that's where everything's based off of. Usually what they'll do with this grid is each one of those flags now represents a specific area. So they usually do it with letters and numbers. So in this case, we can arbitrarily say that that is section D, the next one is section E. And so this would be, the first one might be E1, this might be E2. And so as we're mapping this, everything goes into E2. And depending on where we found it, we try to map it within each one of these little squares. All right. The grid system we used was actually a suspended grid system. So we had some wires hung up and actually took the grid, suspended it so we could actually lean over and not have it set on the bones, because sometimes they're very fragile, they'll break apart on us. The only problem you run into there is where your perspective is. So you've got to kind of be right over it to make sure you draw them in the right grid. Otherwise your perspective changes a little and they all shift slightly. They haven't got a whole lot in this picture. This next one is a little more exciting with the vertebrae that they have here. This is most likely from a sauropod, just judging on the size. So a big long-necked dinosaur in this case. That's not the one that we're dealing with. I'll get to that one in a minute. But as you can see, we'd be drawing each one of these in the field book as they appear and making notes along each side. So you'll notice that a lot of these, especially toward some of the ribs over here, they're broken up. They're not in one piece. Well, we're making notes of that as well. All right. That tells us a little bit about what happened to this animal as it died, as it was buried. Okay, there we go. There we go. All right. So the geology of the quarry is examined to understand what kind of environment the animal's in. All right. What's the area like? What happened? What was going on? What's the environment like? How is this animal buried? A lot of animals are buried in a river or near a stream along those lines because fossilization has to happen at a fairly rapid pace. The animal has to be buried really quickly or we don't get it. If you've been hunting or if you've been even on the side of the road, you've seen an animal that's been hit, and what happens to it? Well, you've got birds that are picking at it, you have scavengers that are taking pieces away. If it's not buried, the animal doesn't get preserved. If it's buried rapidly, then we actually find the stuff. So, another myth that we kind of try and dispel is that fossilization happens all the time. No, it doesn't. It's actually a very, very rare process. And yes, as we uncover more, and as we get through more of the geology, our initial idea can evolve over time because we find more information to give us more of a picture of what actually is happening. All right, so Walter's bone. There we go. This is what we know. The animal died as the result of a storm event, possibly a hurricane. That was with one of the things that we kept finding. They're called rip-up clasts within the shale and everything else that we're finding. They're torn up. We find this after natural storms even today. The animal, again, was buried very rapidly. The rapid burial is giving us great preservation. We also know that we don't have the tail. So the tail, with the quarries here, the tail would have been off in this area. We lost it. One of the cool things about the preservation of this animal is we're preserving not only the bone, but some of the connective tissue as well, the tendons that go along with this animal. They became ossified as well, which is really exciting. And another thing that we get along with this, which was one of the things that really excited them, skin-like impressions. So we can actually look and see what the skin pattern probably would have been like. There we go. The area where the animal was found is about 74 million years old, so that puts us in the Cretaceous. During this time, the interior seaway cuts North America in half. So Kansas, good portions of Colorado, most of the middle part of the U.S. is underwater at this point. Now the seaway fluctuates in size, so it transgresses where there's more seaway, it regresses where there's less. All right, back and forth. And Rangeley would have been in one of those areas in which you had that fluctuation. So it's right on that beach property. We have North America split into two continents. On the west, you have what they call Laramidia, after the Laramide orogeny, and the one on the east is called Appalachia. So mountains are landmarks on that one. And here's an artist rendition of Transgression Regression. So transgression was at the top, regression at the bottom. And this is probably where we found this animal, was in an area like this. Right around where the storm could have done the most damage. Great place for an animal like this to be, because there's lots of food and lots of places to, die and get buried. The climate-wise, we're looking at something that would have been equivalent to the southeastern United States. Think Louisiana at this point. And here's an example of a transgression regression on a bit larger scale. So there's Laramidia and Appalachia. Very similar, although you can see, I think, a bit more of Colorado covered in this section, and a bit less here. This is where we're interested in this area right here. And there's the interior seaway, just so you guys have a frame of reference on that. All right, so what kind of dinosaur is this Walter that we're calling? It's a Hadrosaur. And here's a wonderful rendition of various hadrosaurs. The ones with the crests, they're pretty. They tend to belong to a family called the Lambeosaurs. The ones without a crest tend to be called Hadrosaurs. This is most likely the one that we're dealing with, based on the bones and everything else. Now, I say that, but we still haven't discovered the skull yet. But based on the size of the bones and everything else, that is an indicator we're looking at possibly these two animals. My bet right now is on number 4 or something similar to that one. So here's one done by Todd Marshall. We see the animal itself, more or less in the same kind of environment. We see some predators in the background, which is also really kind of cool because not far from our actual dig site, we had one of the guys actually do some scouting around on his lunch break in the 100-degree heat. He wanted to take a walk, so he did. And he found a footprint of a predator. Now, what footprint for sure, what dinosaur for sure, based on the size and the age of the rock, it's a tyrannosaur, so it's related to T-Rex, came earlier than T-Rex. There are a few that would have been in the area at the time, but because we only have a footprint and no bones, we'll just go with tyrannosaur at this point. All right, so many different types of hadrosaurs have been found. They've given us a wealth of information on what we know about dinosaurs. One of the cool ones that we found, discovered by Dr. Jack Horner, was in Montana, called Egg Mountain. That gave us a good clue that these animals were not just the lizards that abandoned their nest. They showed parental care. The eggshells were really well crushed. The animals were of various sizes and ages when they found them fossilized. So this has given us a wealth of information on the behavior of these kinds of animals. Some of the other discoveries that we've uncovered, again, yield the skin-like impressions. They call them dinosaur mummies. This has been going on for, I would say, roughly 100 years. We found them, and for whatever reason, hadrosaurs are the most prevalent dinosaur mummies that they find. I don't know if they were clumsy, or if they just had really bad luck. I don't know if it was Murphy's Law acting, 80 million years ago before and acting on those hadrosaurs, but we find a lot of them really caught in those nasty storm events, getting preserved really, really well. So here's an example of one. We can see some of the skin-like impressions here. This is all where the skin would have actually been preserved. Again, this animal isn't necessarily what we would call a true mummy in the sense that we think of like with the Egyptian mummies, but we have the skin impressions there, and it gives us an idea of how the outside tissue, the skin, and some of the connective tissue actually works and with the bones that we normally find. This is a fairly old one. There's some really fantastic ones that we have. This is one that was discovered, I believe, by the Sternbergs. And this one also missing its tail. So here's the hip area. Tail's gone on this one too. I don't know if that's a common thing that happened with these hadrosaurs either. But we can see how things hung on the ribs, where the legs were. Wonderful skin to give us an idea of more than just the bone. This is one of the more fantastic ones. You can actually see the pattern on this one. I believe this is from one of two. It's either Leonardo or Dakota. Both of these hadrosaurs. Both of them very, very famous in the paleontology world. With one of them, they're actually looking at the stomach contents of this animal because it was so rapidly preserved. They've actually found its last meal. It's down in Houston. It's been scanned by NASA. They've got some equipment to actually look inside this, and they found all kinds of wonderful things in it. Also, with the preservation of these last two, Leonardo and Dakota, they've also found when they reassembled the bones, they always stuck them nice and close together. The vertebrae were always close together. What they found is that there's actually space in between. And so this actually increases the estimated length of these animals by about 20%. So with more information, we revise our renditions just a little bit more. So lots of information, clues to behavior, all that stuff is wonderful. They lived in these swampy areas, which we find with the geology. The length, again, with some of these has actually increased due to that discovery that there was actually some, I believe, big amounts of cartilage in between the vertebrae. They've actually done some projections on how fast they could run too, based on how the muscle would have attached near the tail. And with some of these, they've concluded that if it's a dead sprint and the T-Rex doesn't get the drop on the animal, this guy could outrun a T-Rex. Now, some of these could do maybe 30 miles an hour easily. But I think max for T-Rex is about 25. It's okay, it's an ambush predator. All right, like I said before, the research is ongoing. Colorado Northwestern Community College in Rangeley, and they have another part in Craig. They're working with North Carolina State University on this specimen. Because of the specimen, because of the geology that's there in Rangeley and in Craig, they've actually designated the area a federal repository. So Craig, which actually has the facilities to do it and the empty space in which to actually provide the federal repository, has now got the rights to keep the bone so that it can always be studied by scientists who want to come in. This is actually pretty big, the federal repository. The fact that they're actually going to be able to keep it, one of the places that doesn't have those rights right now, Canyon City. And in Canyon City here in Colorado, they've got some of the most fantastic Jurassic animals around that we all know of, Apatosaurus, Brontosaurus, Ceratosaurs, but none of those skeletons are housed in Canyon City because there's no federal repository in that area. They don't have the space for it. The federal repository is also very important as from a scientific point of view because we have people who are commercial fossil collectors. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll collect the specimen on private land. Sometimes it's a brand new specimen that science has never seen before. They sell it to whoever wants it. Sometimes they sell it to a museum, sometimes it goes to a private collector. That's within their rights to do because they work that out with the landowner. But science is never going to see that. And a lot of times the private collectors are like, don't come here. And we're not sure if they've altered the specimens to make them look better. That has happened in the past. With the federal repository status, that means that anybody who's a vertebrate paleontologist or paleontologist of in good standing can then go and examine those bones, write up reports, do some study, and that they're always going to be there. So, we all know as scientists, we all get along, right? And all the theories and ideas that we have are always the same. No. Someone says something, and someone says, let me examine what you got. They go back and they find something new. It's not a bad thing, it's just trying to further the science. And anybody is now allowed to do that. Now, the last one, the molecular quarry is a brand new kind of field of paleontology. In this particular quarry, there were times I had to wear rubber gloves. Out in the field, that's bizarre for me. The reason for this is one of the people in charge at North Carolina State University is Mary Schweitzer. She worked with Dr. Jack Horner, and it was during the discovery of the T-Rex that we all have heard that had the soft tissue, right? She was the one that uncovered that particular bit of information. That soft tissue was one of those things they found by accident. The guy who found the Tyrannosaur that they actually looked at, his name was Bob, and so the dinosaur was called B-Rex. All right? They tried to get the femur out, it was too big, so they had to break it to get it out. It's always one of those calls as a paleontologist, you don't want to try and break a bone if you don't have to. If you do, you want to make sure that you've controlled that break. All right? They broke it. Mary Schweitzer had it in a solution of a fairly weak acid. and came up with this material that was squishy and not supposed to be there. So she started doing some looking and found that there was possibly some DNA, some blood, and of course set off this whole firestorm of, okay, did you find it? Did you really find it? Was it bacteria? Was it not? One of the things that they actually did conclude from B-Rex, or Bob in this case, was that there was some ossification going on, buildup of material in, like we have in birds before they're about to lay an egg. So this particular animal, as it died, was going to get ready to lay an egg. So Bob's a girl. They could actually, that was the only one definitively we could sense. Hasn't happened to anybody else. I'm sure, paleontologists would get really excited about that. But if you think about what actually happened to the animal and where it was in its life, it wasn't so great for the animal, but it's great for science. All right, so here we go, picture time. All right, so here we are, we're working on getting the bones out. We cover the bones with a layer of toilet paper first, we wet it down, then we have burlap dipped in plaster, and we jacket the specimen. We want to do this on both sides. So what we're doing in this particular picture, we've got a bunch of chisels underneath here. We're getting ready to flip the specimen. I'll tell you right now, I don't have video, the flip didn't go well. You always want everything to go with it. What we had was a lot of this stuff was actually left behind. So we had to delicately flip it and then delicately put everything back in here. Then we took the other side, covered that up, so nothing falls out, and everything else is going, everything that we had that didn't go with the flip ends up with the rest of that bone. You'll also notice we have a nice cut here. Well, that was for convenience, because this was part of a much larger jacket that would have been very hard to take out, very cumbersome. A lot of times we use 2x4s, sometimes we use car hoods to help us drag some of this out. This was a good quarter-mile hike down and into the quarry with a path about this wide. And if you need guys to bring this out, you're dealing with at least 400, 500 pounds. Guys, hopefully on either end here, we had some places where we had some cryptobiotic soils. Wasn't really an option to try and step all over those cryptobiotic soils, try and preserve them as much as we can. So we had to make a call and cut it. Didn't go particularly our way, but we still have the specimen, we can put it back together. That's what glue is for. This right here, we have a tibia next to someone's tibia. Here's the end of the tibia here. This isn't completely uncovered, but you can see scale-wise how big it is. The tibia itself looks like it's about 4 feet long. That's this bone right here. That's a big animal as far as height. Estimated height on this thing, probably about 13 feet at the hips. This is a quadruped, right? So on all 4 legs. Pretty big animal. Here we are bagging up some specimens. This was from wonderful find. I don't have my happy picture in here, but I was very excited to find this. With the skin-like impressions that were there, we also had not only the skin-like impressions, but bone and tendon next to them, which is incredibly exciting. Also incredibly rare to actually find this in the field. A lot of times you don't get to find these things in the field. You find them in the lab as you're uncovering the specimen and getting it out of the matrix. Here's our work crew. Again, this is Josh, Ellis, myself, and a few other students. Josh right now is working on a tendon. He's still uncovering the tendon. This tendon runs the length, actually would go quite a bit longer. This tendon, measured it out, it was at least 30 inches long in an unbroken line. This tendon was also connected to some of the bone that was there too. We jokingly referred to it as the master tendon because we hadn't really seen one that big. And there he is, still uncovering it. You can see the length runs from here all the way. Good sized tendon. And the tendons, oddly enough, tend to be in almost a kind of a triangular shape. And it was the tendons themselves that also gave us the clue that this was indeed a hadrosaur. There were people that were, okay, is it a ceratopsian like Triceratops, or is it a hadrosaur? And based on the tendons and everything else that we found, hadrosaur is the winner so far. And there they are jacketing the specimen. So it's really fun in 100-degree heat to work with plaster, especially when the water's been sitting out all day and is warm, because the reaction of that plaster setting speeds up. And what we do is we plaster it, get it all jacketed, and then we take some of that plaster before it sets and help smooth things over, because that plaster has some really rough edges and you can cut yourself really nice if you don't smooth out those edges. But the reaction happens a lot faster. It sets a lot quicker the warmer the water is. So it was okay, we've got this ready to go, hurry up, get this thing plastered, put everything out. If you don't work quick enough, you have a 5-gallon bucket that the plaster's in, that'll solidify, and now you don't have a bucket to use anymore to dump things. Because that thing solidifies, it goes quick, and then you lose some of the material that you were working with. This actually made the Craig Daily News. There's the tibia there. There's one of the ladies working on it. There's Liz's feet, and there's my foot too, just in case you were wondering. But we have quite a few bones here. The tibia is here, the femur and other tibia are here with another bone in this area here. This is the edge of the cord. So the tail, again, would have extended beyond this edge, which is, again, the reason we're saying we have no tail at this point. The rest of the animal goes back this way. We have ribs and all these other things, but again, we hadn't uncovered the skull yet. Here's a bit of perspective for you guys. So this is an animal called Saurolophus. This guy, 6 feet tall. This is the size of the animal. This particular one that is shown here is about 28 feet long. So the tendons are up near the back here, by the hips. All right, there's some other tendons as well near the back. Here's your tibia. This is the bone that we were showing you. Okay, so you can see relative size-wise, this animal's probably 8 feet tall in this picture. So take this tibia and actually put it up to maybe about here on this guy. That's just the tibia. We then have the foot. So this guy's actually only going to come up to the animal that we're currently uncovering. This guy would only come up to this area right here on this animal. So a very large animal. The largest hadrosaur that I know of that's been found is one from China, and that one's 50 feet long, a little over 50 feet. We're looking at a max length on this guy of probably about 50 feet as well from North America. So this one probably when this guy was a teenager, the one that we're uncovering. All right. Just for perspective, much larger. This one, do we have a zoom button? This is the find that made me so happy, right here. Made everyone else happy as well. Because that had everything that we ever could have wanted. We had skin-like impressions, we had the bones and the tendons connected to it. We've got the pattern of what the outside of this animal actually looked like. The pattern is actually very fascinating because in places we have parts that actually give us three-dimensional relief where things are sticking up. We also have places that are giving us three-dimensional relief where things were actually depressed. So this probably means that the skin was folded in some of these areas as it had dried out. We're looking at probably, I don't know, dino jerky at this point. Just putting that out there. But it was a fascinating dig. Asking these people if there are students here that want to go on the next season of this dig, they can. They'll put you up in the dorms in Rangeley. They'll take you out there. Your lunch and meals are provided. It's a hefty cost, about $2,000-3,000. You get three credits worth of your college tuition there, just in case there are those that are interested. And that will conclude what I've got for today. Do we have any questions?